we have seen some progress last few years, certainly more faster progress. But seeing what happened in the last 1 week, it's really quite amazing in terms of what has been put on the table. I thought what we saw the Prime Minister and the President do in Washington, that can't be topped, but we've just done that with your speech and what you said here, which is really, let's dream together, let's dream big, and let's turn dreams into reality. So that's really a great ambition for both of us to start, as we proceed ahead. I had a couple of thoughts. I mean, I think one, we know why we're doing this event here in IIT, because technology has been really at the very, if you look at the joint statement, I tell all friends, do read it, because there's so much out there. And
it's like, maybe a 3-hour read, so like give yourself some time. It's the longest joint statement in U.S. history.
Normally, when bureaucrats draft joint statements, pretty boring, but in this case, at least, there's a lot to look at. But I think what you said about the 4 baskets, which is really you want to talk about peace, you want to talk about prosperity, you want to talk about the planet, and you want to talk about the people. But one running theme in all this is really technology. That is the core basis on which we are going to achieve our new objectives. So it makes it very appropriate to hold it in the Indian Institute of Technology. But I see the difference. I mean, I think Indians have always seen the US as a great land of technology. In fact, the first Indian student to go to MIT, a man called Keshav Bhatt, 1882. Because many in Western India, the modernizing forces of Western India, the emerging, budding industrialists saw we need industry, and the best place to get technology for industry is the United States, not Oxford and Cambridge. And I know you've been to Oxford, but really the idea that, look, we need to get American technology to make India progress, that's been an idea, and I think finally we're seeing that idea being realized. But the difference from the 50s and 60s, idea that we must get technology, in quotes, from the United States, to one, what you're talking about today, is to actually develop it together. So we talk about, India and the US, Indian scientists, Indian technologists working with US technologies to design, to develop, and to produce, a range of things. You think it's really impossible to actually do that? I mean, how do you plan to go forward to really? I mean, this is quite an ambitious agenda.
So you're exactly right. When I heard about ISET, I didn't know what that meant. If you don't speak the language of acronyms, or even when you hear it explain, Initiative on Critical Emerging Technologies, if you're not a specialist, I mean, think of yourself, if you're an average Indian or an average American, what does that actually mean? Which is why I kind of talked about it as something that can connect, protect, and detect. And it's a contrast, technology that connects us rather than divides us, because we see that happening. Technology that protects us rather than hurts us, and technology that can detect or heal instead of harm are, in many ways, the biggest, outside of climate change, existential threats that we have. Will our phones be used to, listen to us and to oppress us? Will social media make us unable to think? Will we move forward in ways that are harmful or not? So those values that underscore, I think, are first what connects us. But is it possible, was your question? I deeply believe it is, and there's a couple things that give me some hope. One is that we have policymakers at the top who have kind of understood this, the urgency of it. National security advisors who get why this is critically important. But government can't deliver technology. It has a good track record in the United States. We wouldn't have an internet globally without government. I mean, some of the greatest breakthroughs sometimes come from government funding, but government doesn't actually take to scale. That's the private sector. So the first thing I'd say is, in the past, if it was just American technology and Indians saying, please give it to us, we could do that, but it's an unequal exchange. I don't know what the percentage is now. Maybe it's 80-20 still American, Indian. But every year it's going to go further, 70-30, 60-40, and who knows where we'll stop. I do envisage a time in which Indian technology generated from here is at least as important and as valuable for the United States to benefit from as vice versa. That's how the equation is changing. What is the next big idea? Is it UPI? Is it the way that you have leapfrogged our country in terms of getting the electronic exchange and access to capital to the very poorest people in your country in a way that we don't have yet? Will it be something else that we don't know yet? Will it be two startups that find each other in space or defense sector in the United States and India, and together come up with the next big idea that changes things? But I think the last thing, and we talked about this a little bit upstairs, is we now need to help make sure this isn't just an aspiration and every 6 months or so an amazing coming together of folks. We need on the Indian side and on the American side to put resources and structure around ISET to make sure that this is happening 365 days a year. And that's one of the goals of our mission coming up, and I know of our president and our prime minister.
I think staying with science and technology, I mean, the cooperation is not new. I mean, if you go back to the right to the independence, post-independence in India, the early collaborations in nuclear energy, really, and the first reactors were American, the first power station was American, the first satellite was built by Ford Aerospace. So we began really doing a lot of things, and then of course we went through a bad patch as well. But today, the change I think is from being a boutique interface. It's really a few government agencies talking to each other, small communities interacting, and then they got into trouble on a whole range of issues. But what you mapped in Washington last week is really to make it an expansive engagement. We saw the two leaders, President Biden and Prime Minister Modi, sit with the business guys from both sides. Sorry, not just guys, they were girls as well, telling the business folk that, look, now is the time to work together. It's rare that two leaders sit together with the CEOs and say, we have the political support, we want you to work together. Then we saw the index where defense startups coming together in Washington. So this is really entirely a whole different communities. And then you talk about universities coming together to work together, the labs. This is really a massive choir, right? I mean, how are you going to make them sing from the same sheet of music? I mean, how are you going to generate that implementation?
Well, traditionally, government is in your way when you don't want us to be around, and we're nowhere to be found when you need us. And we have to invert that. We have to be there when you need us, and we have to get out of the way when you don't want us to be there. What does getting out of the way mean? It means here in India, fewer export controls so that you can actually bring manufacturing in, investment in. It shouldn't be the exception, it needs to be the rule. The iPhone is now being manufactured here, by the way, now the largest factory in Indian history. But that shouldn't be the exception to the rule. The rule should change to allow more of that to happen. And as I talk to my Indian friends who are CEOs, they say, we can compete globally now. We can stand on our own 2 feet. There was a hotelier who talked to me. He said, if you wanted to summarize India's relationship between business and government, he said there's been 3 phases. Phase 1, if I'm the government and your business, I can't do it and you can't do it either. Phase 2, you can't do it, I'm going to do it. Phase 3, okay, I can't do it, but you can only do it if I let you do it. And we need to get to phase 4, which is go do it and only intervene if there's something to correct. And I think that on the American side, it's probably similar too. We've had a lot of things that have held back. Well, can we trust India? Should we give that? I hope people see the GE engine deal not as some sort of bet, not as some sort of strategic call, but fundamental trust, because we're leaning in with technology more than we have even with some of our closest allies. You don't do that on a strategic bet. You do that on a relationship and a friendship that isn't a hot and cold thing. It's not going to change 5 years. That's saying we're going to be friends for the next 25 to 50 years. So I think that it's really important for us to find those spaces and those places. And I have to tell you, when I was around that table in the East Room of the White House, and you had Indian and American CEOs, take Google, for instance. An Indian-born CEO of one of the 3 or 4 largest companies in the world saying that the investments that Google is making here in India on artificial intelligence are game-changing for artificial intelligence itself because of the linguistic diversity of India. What you can test here is unlike anywhere in the world, and they're putting billions of dollars behind this. When you see somebody like Reliance Jio talking about bringing green hydrogen to the level we all fantasize about it could cost, I think India is probably the best place where that might actually become a reality and change for the world what the next oil is. So I think we have to get out of the way and let private sector do what it does well. We need to matchmake more often, and then we have to break down the rules that hold us back. Because if we just say 10 years from now, that was really cool, there's like 5 or 6 things that were impactful, that's not enough to change the world and to protect the world. It has to be frictionless, I think, for us to get what we need.
Now, before we go to the audience, I mean, just one thought. I mean, you talked about the visas. I mean, India, everyone wants to get a visa to the United States.
2 lucky winners today. No, I can't say that, and Brandon will kill me.
No, I think we've seen, what you mentioned in your speech, really promoting movement of Indians to the US. But you also mentioned not as many Americans are coming into India. And you said, look, that's going to be done. We would like to see more American students, more American professionals, more American faculty come in and work in India. I mean, is the Indian system ready, you think, to do that?
I think that's going to be a question for India to answer more than the ambassador from the United States. I know that the intention and the will is there among every American university. All of America is waking up to India. Every business is saying, I better invest in India. Every traveler is like, hey, maybe that's a good time to come to India. Every student's like, maybe I should study India. And certainly, as you look at academic institutions, they're saying we need to have a presence in India. But who gets there first, who gets there best, and who gets there deepest, I think will be up to the partnerships we form. I intend to make our mission even stronger matchmaker. I intend to advocate and to tell my Indian friends, these might be some of the rules that still hold back those possibilities, but I think there's a lot of creativity. I mean, the director and I were talking about this, whether we have joint degrees where you do 2 years in the US and then 2 years in India or vice versa. It's affordable for American students to come here. The level has a high excellence, but it will require Indian higher educational bureaucracy to reform itself to be a little bit more entrepreneurial. Vice versa, it'll require American universities to take greater leaps of faith. I shared that upstairs, and this is nothing against Costa Rica. We'd all love to go study in Costa Rica. More American students study in Costa Rica as university exchange students than India. That's crazy. This is the most populous country in the world. So we can point fingers and get nowhere, or we can figure out ways to join hands. And I think that's going to be more for India to decide, but I can tell you American universities can't wait, and I think American students can't wait to come.
Thank you, Ambassador, for agreeing to take a couple of questions.
Sure, of course.
Floor. So we had a question from Ravi Pushkar, who's going to, is he here? Yeah.
Over here. Hi, Ravi.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ravi Pushkar. I'm a final year student of dual degree in the Mathematics and Computing department. Thank you, Ambassador, for your wonderful insight. I have a question on climate-related changes. On climate change, sir, how can the developed countries expect the developing countries to curtail their energy consumption at the cost of their growth, especially when the developed countries are the main polluters?
So I have 2 answers to that. One which you'll like and one which you may not like, but I'm going to say them both. I think the part you'll like is I 100% agree that, and when I led C40, which was the global organization for cities, we need to disproportionately be allocating resources to the developing world, the so-called global south, to help implement the transition away from dirty fossil fuels and to allow them and enable them and empower them as they're building out new transportation systems, buildings, electricity grids to be greener. It is an imperative for all of us. If the developed world doesn't see that, if we don't bring real dollars, if we don't bring private dollars in, we will not achieve our goals. But the second part of the answer is we shouldn't let the argument against be an excuse to go slow in the developing world, which sometimes it is. Well, you got to develop. Come back to us in 50 years after we burn a lot of coal, and then we'll talk to you just as UK, US, everybody else did. The difference between then, in the 19th century, and the 20th century, and now, is we didn't know then what we know now. And we're not asking you to do this for us. We have to all do this for ourselves. You see the heat here in India. You see the people who are dying during heat waves that go up. It's just a statistic, and it's not unique to India. India need not be defensive about that statistic. That happens in the United States. That happens everywhere. But we need to equip people to adapt in the short term, not just reducing emissions, but to have access to things like air conditioning, low carbon air conditioning that will save their lives, literally. But India doesn't have the luxury of waiting for multiple decades. And in fact, India is showing that it won't wait multiple decades, putting out more renewable power, more solar power now than even the United States, second, I think, in the world last year. So we need to see that accelerate even more, but not because the United States is telling India to do that, but because India needs to do that for India and for Indians. So I think you're right, and we should fund as much of that as possible. But even if the United States disappeared tomorrow, India is still part of a planet which demands every country align their resources and policies to reduce emissions as quickly as possible of carbon so that we don't all die.
Thanks. I think we're beginning to already cross the time. Yeah, we can take some.
We can go a little.
First, I'm going to get from the press, Abhishek Kapoor.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, Ambassador Abhishek Kapoor from Republic TV.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. And if I could pick from Martin Luther King, your speech could be called "I Too Have a Dream." And coming to the question now, the United States has been pivoting to India for a while now, a decade and more, from the tentativeness but high on optics visit of President Clinton to President W. Bush being panned for giving the nuclear deal in exchange of mangoes. And then we had President Obama, of course, wondering if $100 billion was a big enough target or big enough ambition for India-US trade. And then we had Prime Minister Modi in 2016 at the Capitol in his joint address saying that there have been hesitations of history. Has the time come to forget them? And now, in his latest address, he said, sky is not the limit. According to you, what's really changed? As the American hymn goes, something gotta give. What has really changed that makes you believe that the time has come now when India and US are going to have the most defining partnership? What has changed in the last few years?
It's a great question and great context historically. I had this conversation with my own team this morning where I said, I bet there's been a lot of people in this same room, because the embassy's been around for many decades, who have come here the day after a big something has happened in US-India news saying this is the biggest day ever in US-India history. And I don't want to be so naive to think that our day is bigger than theirs. But I think quantitatively what is undeniable is that the acceleration of this relationship is never been as fast as it is today. And the level of trust has never been as deep as it is today among two countries as equals. Relationships are difficult. I think there are relationships around the world based on convenience that have no limits. We're a relationship based on friendship that for too often has put limits on ourselves. And I think what's changing now is that we really do envisage something without limits in all arenas. They won't always agree, but that, like any relationship, any friendship, is so deep that we know we're going to be together for a long time. And what's changed, I saw polling where America has positive feelings from about 80% of Indians. That's a very unique voice and feeling coming from the people of India, almost unheard of around the world, and maybe unheard of for any other nation here. So I think it doesn't have to be the words of a political leader. I like you, always sometimes have to question. If a government's saying something, thank God we have a press to look at it. We have an academic sector to analyze it. But if you do that, honestly, you will see a depth of connection that has never existed here before. And leaders at the top reflect ultimately their people. This wasn't just the desire of President Biden and Prime Minister Modi. This is the desire of the Indian people and the American people. That's what's changed.
There were a couple of hands I saw. Maybe we'll take them together, and then you can answer it together. Yes, sir, please. Please identify yourself.
I'm Dr. Basan, faculty here in IIT.
Hello, doctor.
So I have one request and one concern.
Yes.
The request is regarding the visa. There is a category J1, that is research category, and that has restriction of coming back and staying 2 years here. And that psychologically, prevent the researchers to think for longer time of contributions of research collaboration.
Yes.
So you may consider that like as a barrier for this kind of technology growth.
Yep.
And my concern is like we are going to build a car kind of things in which both the wheels are not of the same size in technology. So what kind of preventive measures you are putting that the car should be balanced? Thank you.
Okay, I'll take this second question from here, and then we can. Please identify yourself, sir.
Wonderful listening to you. My name is Rajiv Khurana from Lung Care Foundation.
Good to see you.
To see you.
Thank you for your nice note.
I love the term "sapne saakar kare." But beyond Indians looking at US visa, when we talk about the dreams, we also need to think about dreams which have never been dreamt before. What are your tips for people in both the countries vis-a-vis people and the political leadership in terms of dreaming which have never been dreamt before?
Well, I'm going to end with that question. So let me come back to the first one. I don't disagree with your analysis at all when it comes to J1. That requires changes that an ambassador can't do himself or herself. But I think you're right. And it's silly for us to invest in people's education and lose the potential by chasing them away, unlike what Australia, Canada, and other places do. At the same time, I don't want to just take the very best of Indian students and keep them forever. I think there's this wonderful thing that's happening now where it's two ways, where I met Indians who have been in America for 30 years, returning here to lead companies and startups and to permanently resettle in India. And I think that's going to be a great thing, again, to balance what has been more of a one-way bridge to the United States and not from the United States. When it comes to, I was trying to think one of those old hot rods that have like the big wheels on the back and the smaller ones up front. Those things go pretty darn fast. I think it can be balanced as long as we know and calibrate and engineer to make sure we know what's happening. And I would say to you, like I said before, maybe if on the technology front, if it's 80-20 or 70-30 right now, there will be a time when maybe those wheels will reverse or certainly be equal to each other. And we just have to prepare to have that balance in place, and I think we can go anywhere. I'm not worried about that. We don't need to have 50-50. It's not like India is giving us 50% of its jet engine technology to help us in the United States yet, because India's not there. But like I said, maybe it's UPI, maybe it's something in the digital stack where we're going to see something and it will transform the United States for the first time coming from India. And I can't wait for us to have that moment. And so when it comes to the dreams, and I'll end with this, there's a poem I shared with the staff when I first got here, the Team India, that is about the poet Andrea del Sarto, who was an artist in Italy. And there's a line in this poem by Robert Browning, and it says, "A man's reach must always exceed his grasp." We live in 2023, so a person's reach must always exceed his or her grasp. And I loved it. It was so powerful. I read it when I was mayor, and I thought, think of the challenges that we try to overcome and those who have come before us. Think about the generations that rose up here in India to fight for freedom and against colonialism, but died before they could taste that freedom, but that one day others would live. In America, the slave that fought for her freedom never experienced a single day of that, but today her descendants are free. The women who said, we should be able to vote just like men, but never participate in a single election, but who have great-granddaughters who today are voting. Folks who fight for marriage equality. This is Pride Month. I know that's before the Supreme Court here, and we went through that in the United States. People who just wanted to love whomever they love, but died before they were able to have a sanctioned marriage from government. These moments in history are written there because people did reach beyond their grasp. And so what I say when you dream, don't just dream about, oh, I could be 10% more, or that thing that we screwed up for 40 years, let's just get it right. Let's put that aside and dream big. What can we do on trade together? What can we do on technology together? What can we do in the defense industry together? What can we do to save this planet because of the climate technologies, from sequestering carbon here to coming up with green hydrogen to figuring out a financing for the growth of the middle class here, not at the expense of the planet. And the second line of that poem says, after all, what's a heaven for? And so I ask you all, After all, what is the US-India relationship for, if not to reach beyond our grasp?
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Yeah.